They told you that if you made six figures, you would be safe. They told you that once your salary crossed $100,000 a year, you had finally made it, that you were now part of the stable class, that homeownership was simply a matter of time. Work hard, stay consistent, wait your turn, and the house would come. But if that were true, why are so many six-figure earners still renting? Why are professionals with degrees, promotions, and strong resumes refreshing Zillow at night, realizing that the numbers still don't work? Why does $120,000 a year feel powerful in conversation, yet powerless in the housing market? Something doesn't add up. You did everything right. You studied, you delayed gratification, you built a career, you increased your income step by step. You played the responsible game. So why does the goalpost keep moving? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Six figures were never designed to create ownership. They were designed to create compliance. A high salary makes you feel accomplished. It gives you better options than before. Better apartment, better car, better vacations. But better is not the same as free. Income upgrades your lifestyle. Assets upgrade your position, and those are two very different things. Most people believe that income equals progress, that if your paycheck grows, your power grows with it. But the housing market does not respond to your effort. It responds to capital flows, to scarcity, to leverage, to momentum. And leverage does not care about your promotion. This is the rule most people never see. Income grows in straight lines. Assets move in waves. Straight lines cannot outrun waves. You were trained to believe that hitting six figures was the finish line. In reality, it was just a psychological milestone. The number feels big. It sounds impressive. It carries cultural weight. But cultural weight is not economic power. There was a time when $100,000 meant margin. Today, in many U.S. cities, it barely means access. Property values have surged. Interest rates have shifted. Institutional investors compete with cash. Supply tightens quietly, and while you celebrate the raise, the entry price rises. Not because you failed, because the game is asymmetrical. You're playing a linear game inside an exponential system. And exponential systems do not reward effort the way linear systems do. They reward positioning. You were told that discipline would be enough, but discipline without leverage only creates endurance. Endurance is not ownership. Ownership requires a different equation. That equation is not taught in school. It is not discussed in corporate performance reviews. It is not celebrated at salary milestones. Because salary is easy to measure, positioning is not. A six-figure income can still be fragile. If your income stops, everything tied to it stops. Rent, car payments, lifestyle. Momentum. Income gives you comfort. Assets give you insulation. Comfort feels like success. Insulation feels like control. Most high earners confuse the two, and that confusion is expensive. This is not about blaming the system. It is about understanding it. There are two financial games operating at the same time. One rewards labor, the other rewards leverage. If you only upgrade your income, you remain in the first game. If you want to understand why six figures still cannot buy a real home, you must look at the second, because the housing market does not respond to effort. It responds to capital structure. And once you see that, everything changes. This is not a housing crisis. It is a structural mismatch. You were trained to grow income. You were never trained to control assets. That is the gap. And that gap is the reason six figures feel smaller than they sound. Understand this early, and you stop chasing raises as your primary strategy. Ignore it, and you will spend years wondering why success still feels just out of reach. That is the rule. And this is where we begin. Chapter 1. The six-figure illusion. Six figures feel like a rival. The moment your income crosses $100,000 a year, something shifts inside you. Not just financially, Psychologically, the number carries weight. It sounds powerful. It sounds secure. For decades, six figures represented distance from financial stress, distance from paycheck to paycheck living, distance from instability. That memory still exists in culture. Parents repeat it. Career advisors promote it. Corporate ladders reward it. Just get to six figures. The number became a symbol of competence, a milestone of adulthood, proof that the system worked for you. But symbols age faster than systems change. The number stayed iconic. The economic landscape did not. Housing costs climbed. Healthcare premiums increased. Insurance tightened. Property taxes rose. Urban demand intensified. Yet the emotional power of six figures remained untouched. That is the illusion. The illusion is not that $100,000 is insignificant. The illusion is that it is sufficient. Crossing that line produces relief. Relief feels like progress. Progress feels like safety. Safety reduces urgency, and reduced urgency changes behavior. You upgrade carefully at first. A better apartment in a stronger neighborhood. A car aligned with your professional image. Vacations that feel earned rather than aspirational. Nothing irrational happens. Nothing reckless. But expectations recalibrate. Lifestyle rarely expands in dramatic leaps. It adjusts quietly. Once adjusted, it becomes normal. And what becomes normal becomes necessary. Six figures raise your baseline. But raising your baseline is not the same as raising your leverage. That difference defines the illusion. Income can elevate lifestyle. Ownership elevates position. Lifestyle consumes income. Position protects it. A six-figure earner can live well and still remain structurally exposed. Exposure does not look dramatic. It looks functional. Bills are paid. Retirement accounts receive contributions. Savings grow gradually. From the outside, everything appears stable. But stability is not insulation. If income pauses, the system tightens. Rent still exists. Car payments remain. Insurance renews. Subscriptions continue. Daily costs do not wait. Six figures create comfort. Comfort can create dependence. Dependence on continuity. Continuity feels safe until disruption appears. This is where the illusion deepens. Status begins to anchor identity. You're now in a different bracket socially. Peers assume strength. Family assumes security. Colleagues assume flexibility. But social elevation does not equal structural control. It increases expectation. Expectation increases pressure. You feel less willing to downgrade, less flexible to relocate, less open to temporary sacrifice. The income that was meant to expand options can quietly narrow them, not because you overspent, because identity hardened. Once identity aligns with a higher earning level, every decision passes through that lens. Would someone at this level live there? Drive that? Delay that? Identity protects comfort. Markets reward positioning. Those are different priorities. Six figures reduce visible urgency. When income is low, urgency is obvious. When income is moderate, urgency is present. When income is high enough to feel stable, urgency fades. But asset markets do not pause for comfort. They move independently. Institutional capital does not slow down because you received a promotion. Migration patterns do not adjust to your budgeting strategy. Demand does not wait for your savings to feel complete. While you feel stable, prices can accelerate. That acceleration rarely feels dramatic in real time. It feels incremental. A few percentage points here, a bidding war there, a tightening inventory cycle. 5 years pass quietly. The same home that once felt slightly expensive now feels distant. The illusion was never about laziness. It was about misreading power. Six figures feel like power because they increase cash flow. True power in asset markets comes from control. Control over appreciating property. Control over financing terms. Control over timing. Cash flow without control is reactive strength. Control creates proactive strength. A six-figure earner can react quickly to expenses. An owner benefits from structural shifts. That distinction is subtle, but it is decisive. Income measures productivity. Assets measure position. Productivity requires continuous effort. Position compounds with time. Six figures measure productivity. They do not automatically create position. That misunderstanding keeps many high earners in a loop. Earn more. Upgrade carefully. Feel stable. Wait for the right moment. The right moment rarely announces itself. It moves quietly through cycles. Without structural positioning, income remains dependent. Dependent on employment, dependent on health, dependent on uninterrupted momentum. Dependence is not weakness, but it is exposure. Exposure means external forces determine your trajectory. Ownership reduces exposure. The illusion says, you have arrived. Reality asks, arrived where? Arrived at higher consumption or arrived at strategic control? The two are not equal. Six figures can fund a comfortable life. They do not guarantee leverage. They can reduce stress. They do not eliminate structural vulnerability. And that is why the illusion persists. It feels earned. It feels deserved. It feels like proof. But proof of income is not proof of ownership. Until that distinction is understood, six figures will continue to impress socially, while underperforming structurally. That is the illusion, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Chapter 2. Income is linear. Housing is asymmetrical. Salary grows in straight lines. You negotiate, you get a raise. 3%, 5%, 8%. You switch companies. Your compensation increases in increments. Each step is predictable. Each gain is attached to effort. Performance review cycles. Promotion ladders. Bonus structures. The system is built around gradual progression. Even strong income growth remains sequential. One year leads to the next. One increase builds on the previous one. Linear. Housing does not move that way. Housing moves in bursts. Interest rates drop. Demand surges. Inventory tightens. Prices jump. A tech company expands into a city. High earners relocate. Cash buyers enter. Prices spike again. Another wave. A supply shortage develops. Construction slows. Population growth continues. Another surge. Asset markets are not built on annual performance reviews. They respond to capital flows, credit expansion, scarcity, and speculation. Those forces are not linear. They compound. That is the asymmetry. A six-figure earner might increase income from $110,000 to $125,000 over 3 years. During that same period, a $500,000 home can become $650,000. The income moved upward. The asset moved outward. The gap widens. Not because effort failed, because the growth curves are different. Linear income assumes time is neutral. Asymmetrical assets assume time is leverage. Every year you remain outside an appreciating asset. You're exposed to its acceleration. Acceleration does not require permission. It does not wait for readiness. It does not synchronize with your savings plan. That mismatch creates the quiet frustration many high earners feel. They are progressing professionally, yet the goal feels farther away. The frustration is not emotional, it is mathematical. Linear growth adds. Asymmetrical growth multiplies. Addition rarely outpaces multiplication. This is the hidden rule. Income is tied to labor. Housing is tied to capital. Labor grows through effort. Capital grows through leverage. Leverage changes the scale of movement. When someone buys a home with 20% down, they control 100% of the asset. If the property appreciates 10%, the gain is based on the full value, not just the down payment. That is asymmetry. Income cannot replicate that effect. You cannot negotiate a raise that multiplies 5 times your effort overnight. You can only step forward. Asset markets can leap. High earners often rely on logic that feels responsible. I'll save more first. I'll wait for prices to cool. I'll increase my down payment. Those strategies are rational inside a linear system. Housing does not operate inside a linear system. It operates inside cycles of expansion and contraction. When credit loosens, demand expands rapidly. When supply tightens, price elasticity increases. When investors enter, competition intensifies. Each of those forces magnifies movement. Linear earners expect proportional relationships. If income rises 5%, they assume affordability shifts 5%. Asymmetrical markets do not obey proportional expectations. They move in waves. Waves do not ask how ready you are. They rise and fall according to structural forces, and if you are not positioned before the wave builds, you chase it afterward. Chasing requires more effort than positioning. Positioning benefits from timing. This is where many six-figure earners miscalculate. They assume that consistent income growth will eventually close the gap. Consistency is powerful in linear systems. It is slow in exponential ones. By the time savings accumulate to the comfortable threshold, the entry price may have shifted again. Not because the market is unfair, because asymmetry accelerates distance. Every year, outside the asset market is not neutral. It can widen exposure. Housing appreciation is not guaranteed every year. But long-term asset markets historically trend upward in competitive regions. Scarcity compounds, desirability compounds, infrastructure compounds, capital compounds. Compounding is asymmetrical by nature. Income does not compound in the same way. It resets each year. You must earn it again. A promotion increases base pay. It does not multiply previous raises automatically. Assets, when positioned correctly, layer appreciation on top of prior appreciation. That layering effect is the core difference. Linear growth builds slowly. Layered growth builds momentum. Momentum is what linear earners often underestimate. They evaluate affordability at a single point in time. The market evolves across time. Time favors assets more aggressively than it favors salaries. That is the asymmetry. The housing market does not need to grow 20% every year to outrun income. It only needs occasional bursts. One surge can erase years of steady saving. One credit expansion cycle can compress affordability dramatically. Those bursts are invisible in daily life. They are visible in hindsight. And hindsight always feels obvious. The structural mismatch is simple. Income depends on your effort. Housing depends on capital velocity. Capital velocity moves faster than individual labor. This is not pessimism. It is mechanics. When mechanics are misunderstood, frustration feels personal. When mechanics are understood, strategy changes. Linear earners ask, how much more do I need to make? Strategic players ask, how quickly can I secure position before the next wave? Different questions, different timelines, different outcomes. The housing market is not impressed by your annual review. It responds to capital deployment. Until that distinction is recognized, six figures will continue to feel strong on paper, yet insufficient in competition. That is the asymmetry. And asymmetry defines the modern housing game. Chapter 3. The employee game versus the ownership game. There are two financial games operating at the same time. Most people only recognize one. The employee game is familiar. You exchange time for income. You develop skills. You increase value in the marketplace. You negotiate compensation. The rules are clear. Work harder, become more competent. Climb the hierarchy, earn more. Progress is visible. A higher title, a larger paycheck, a stronger resume. The feedback loop is immediate. Effort produces reward. This system feels fair because the cause and effect are direct. The ownership game works differently. It is not built around time, it is built around control. Control over assets, control over capital, control over leverage. The employee game rewards productivity. The ownership game rewards positioning. Productivity depends on continuous effort. Positioning depends on strategic timing. In the employee game, your ceiling expands gradually. In the ownership game, your scale expands structurally. That distinction determines trajectory. A six-figure salary is a strong position inside the employee game. It is not automatically a strong position inside the ownership game, because the metrics are different. Employees measure success through income. Owners measure success through asset control. Employees focus on salary growth. Owners focus on capital multiplication. The employee game values stability. The ownership game values leverage. Stability reduces volatility. Leverage amplifies movement. These are not moral judgments. They are structural differences. The employee game is safer in the short term. The ownership game is stronger in the long term. The confusion happens when high earners assume success in one game automatically transfers to the other. It does not. A six-figure earner can dominate performance reviews and still remain absent from asset growth cycles. Performance is internal to a company. Assets operate in external markets. Those markets respond to forces beyond your resume. In the employee game, income stops when labor stops. In the ownership game, growth can continue independent of daily effort. That independence is the defining shift. When a property appreciates, it does not require overtime. When equity builds, it does not require a meeting. When leverage magnifies gains, it does not require a promotion. Ownership scales without linear labor. That is the advantage. The employee mindset often approaches housing through comfort. Can I afford the monthly payment comfortably? Does this fit within my current lifestyle? Will this increase my stress? These are responsible questions. They are employee game questions. The ownership mindset approaches housing through position. Does this asset secure long-term exposure? Does this lock in control before appreciation? Does this place me inside the cycle rather than outside it? Different questions produce different timelines. Employees wait for comfort. Owners act before comfort. Comfort seeks stability. Ownership seeks asymmetry. In the employee game, risk is defined as instability of income. In the ownership game, risk is defined as lack of asset exposure. An employee fears losing a job. An owner fears missing a cycle. These fears are not equal. They are directional. One looks at present security. The other looks at future positioning. Six-figure earners often feel secure in the employee game. That security reduces perceived urgency. But the ownership game does not reward security. It rewards entry. Entry creates exposure. Exposure creates compounding. Compounding creates separation. Separation creates power. The employee game is reactive. You respond to performance expectations. You respond to company needs. You respond to market demand for your skills. The ownership game is proactive. You choose assets. You structure leverage. You position capital. One game asks for your time. The other game asks for your foresight. Time is limited. Foresight scales. A high earner who remains exclusively in the employee game will experience increasing friction over time. Income rises, but asset prices may rise faster. Effort increases, but leverage multiplies faster. Eventually, frustration appears, not because income is weak, because positioning is absent. The employee game rewards reliability. The ownership game rewards courage under uncertainty. Employees optimize for consistency. Owners optimize for control of asymmetrical upside. This is why two individuals with identical incomes can end up in dramatically different positions a decade later. One remains a high earner. The other becomes a capital holder. The difference is not intelligence, it is game selection. The employee game is necessary. It builds income, it builds discipline, it builds initial capital. But remaining exclusively in that game creates dependency. Dependency on promotions, Dependency on industry stability. Dependency on uninterrupted employment. Ownership reduces dependency. It introduces leverage. Leverage introduces volatility. Volatility introduces growth potential. The employee game smooths volatility. The ownership game harnesses it. Smoothing volatility feels safe. Harnessing volatility creates expansion. Six figures feel powerful inside a company. They may feel small inside competitive asset markets. Because companies reward performance, markets reward positioning. If you only measure progress by income, you remain inside the first game. If you measure progress by asset control, you enter the second. That is the shift. The employee game will always have ceilings. The ownership game has cycles. Cycles can be timed. Ceilings cannot be negotiated indefinitely. When six-figure earners struggle to afford homes, the issue is rarely incompetence. It is game misalignment. Strong performance in one arena, limited positioning in another. Once that misalignment is seen, strategy changes. Income becomes a tool, not the destination. Ownership becomes the objective, not the afterthought. That is the separation between earning well and building power. And without that shift, six figures will remain impressive, yet structurally incomplete. Chapter 4. Inflation punishes earners. First, inflation does not announce itself loudly. It does not knock on your door and demand attention. It moves quietly. A grocery bill rises slightly. Insurance premiums adjust upward. Property taxes increase. Rents renew higher. At first, it feels manageable, especially if you earn six figures. Because strong income creates confidence. Confidence creates tolerance. Tolerance delays reaction. That delay is expensive. Inflation does not punish assets first. It punishes labor. Wages adjust slowly. Prices adjust quickly. When currency supply expands, asset prices often respond before salaries do. Real estate reacts. Stocks react. Commodities react. Paychecks wait for review cycles. This is not accidental. It is structural. Assets are priced in forward expectations. Wages are negotiated backward. That gap defines exposure. When inflation accelerates, the cost of living moves in real time. Salary adjustments move annually. A one-year delay in wage adjustment can mean a permanent shift in affordability. For high earners, the effect is subtle. You're not priced out of groceries. You're not choosing between bills. But the invisible erosion compounds. The same six-figure income buys less house than it did 5 years ago. Not because you earn less, because currency buys less. Inflation reduces purchasing power. Purchasing power determines access. Access determines ownership. Ownership determines leverage. If inflation reduces purchasing power faster than your income increases, your position weakens, even if your income grows. This is the hidden contradiction many professionals face. You're earning more than ever, yet large purchases feel harder. Housing, especially, reflects monetary expansion quickly. When interest rates drop and liquidity increases, capital searches for yield. Real estate becomes a target. Institutional buyers enter, investors refinance. Demand expands, prices rise. Wage growth does not match that speed. Labor contracts are sticky. Corporate budgets adjust cautiously. Performance reviews follow schedule. Inflation follows momentum. Momentum does not wait for HR. That is why inflation punishes earners first. Earners hold currency. Owners hold assets. Currency loses value during inflationary cycles. Assets reprice. If you primarily hold income in cash form, even temporarily, you're exposed to depreciation. Depreciation does not feel dramatic in daily life. It feels like mild tightening. But mild tightening across years becomes distance. A home priced at $450,000 becomes $600,000. Your salary increases from $105,000 to $120,000. You feel stronger. Your purchasing power feels weaker. The math is not emotional, it is mechanical. Inflation transfers advantage to asset holders. Because assets absorb liquidity, currency absorbs erosion. This does not mean inflation is always extreme. It means inflation is directional. Over long periods, currency trends downward in purchasing power. Over long periods, scarce assets trend upward in price. If you are positioned inside assets, inflation can work in your favor. If you remain outside, inflation works against you. Six figures do not immunize you from that process. They delay the discomfort. Delay creates complacency. Complacency widens exposure. There is another layer most high earners underestimate. Inflation impacts future obligations differently than present income. When property taxes rise, they rise permanently. When insurance premiums increase, they rarely revert fully. When maintenance costs climb, they compound over time. Income increases often feel larger than they are because they are measured in nominal dollars. Housing costs rise in nominal dollars too, but assets reprice immediately. Income adjusts incrementally. This is the asymmetry within inflation. It accelerates asset valuation faster than wage growth. It reduces the relative strength of labor-based earners. A high salary protects lifestyle. It does not protect access to appreciating assets. Protection requires ownership. Ownership locks in price at entry. If you secure a fixed-rate mortgage, inflation can reduce the real cost of that debt over time. Your payment remains nominally fixed. Currency weakens. The real burden declines. That advantage belongs to asset holders, not to renters, not to cash savers. Inflation favors debt tied to appreciating assets. It penalizes cash tied to rising costs. Six-figure earners often accumulate savings diligently, but savings held in low-yield accounts during inflationary cycles lose purchasing power. The loss is invisible. There is no dramatic event, just gradual erosion. Gradual erosion creates long-term displacement. When inflation punishes earners first, it does so quietly. You feel busy, you feel productive, you feel compensated. But the asset market does not measure your effort. It measures liquidity and scarcity. If liquidity expands and you are not positioned, you chase. If scarcity intensifies and you are not positioned, you compete. Competition raises entry cost. Entry cost widens the gap. The illusion says higher income protects you. Reality says asset exposure protects you. Income helps you survive inflation. Ownership helps you benefit from it. Without ownership, inflation is friction. With ownership, inflation can become leverage. Six figures reduce daily stress. They do not eliminate structural vulnerability to currency erosion. The earlier that distinction is understood, the sooner strategy shifts. Income becomes a tool to acquire assets, not a shield against monetary forces. Inflation does not punish earners because they lack discipline. It punishes earners because they hold depreciating units while assets reprice. That is the rule. And until that rule is internalized, high income will continue to feel strong, while purchasing power quietly weakens beneath it. Chapter 5. The mortgage trap. Nobody explains. A mortgage is not the problem. Misunderstanding the mortgage is. Debt by itself is neutral. It can accelerate wealth. It can accelerate fragility. The difference is structure. Most six-figure earners approach housing through a single question: what can I afford monthly? That question feels responsible. It feels disciplined. It feels rational. But it hides the trap. Affordability is not ownership strength. Affordability is payment tolerance. Payment tolerance measures how much pressure you can survive. Ownership strength measures how much leverage you can control. Those are different calculations. When someone evaluates a home based only on monthly payment, they are optimizing for comfort. Comfort reduces anxiety, but comfort can obscure exposure. A $700,000 home with 10% down may feel manageable at today's income level. The payment fits inside the budget. The spreadsheet balances. But the structure beneath that payment matters more than the payment itself. High leverage amplifies risk. When down payment is thin, volatility becomes dangerous. If the market stalls or corrects, equity evaporates quickly. If income disrupts temporarily, fixed obligations remain. This is the mortgage trap. The trap is not borrowing. The trap is borrowing without structural margin. Six-figure earners often believe their income provides that margin. Strong salary creates confidence. Confidence encourages stretching. Stretching feels justified because future raises are expected. But future raises are not guaranteed. And markets do not align with promotion cycles. Another layer of the trap is emotional. Home ownership is culturally positioned as a rival. Buying the house feels like proof of success. That emotional pressure can distort timing. You feel ready because your income says you are ready, but income does not define cycle position. The housing market operates in phases: expansion, stability, correction, recovery. Entering at peak leverage during expansion requires resilience. Resilience is not measured by income alone. It is measured by liquidity, flexibility, and margin. Margin is rarely discussed. Banks calculate debt-to-income ratios. They approve based on thresholds. Approval does not equal safety. Approval measures qualification. Qualification measures risk tolerance for the lender. It does not measure optimal structure for you. A lender may approve 45% debt to income. That does not mean 45% creates strength. Strength requires breathing room. Breathing room absorbs shocks. Shocks are inevitable. Maintenance surprises, insurance adjustments, tax reassessments, interest rate changes for variable loans. High earners underestimate fixed commitments. Because income feels steady. Steady income encourages static planning. Static planning assumes stable environment. Housing markets are not static. Employment markets are not static. When mortgage payments dominate monthly cash flow, flexibility declines. Flexibility is hidden power. Without flexibility, every disruption feels amplified. This is why some six-figure homeowners feel trapped rather than empowered. The mortgage was supposed to create security. Instead, it created pressure. Pressure is not ownership strength. Ownership strength comes from asymmetry. If appreciation outweighs obligation, leverage works in your favor. If obligation outweighs appreciation, leverage works against you. The trap occurs when the mortgage is used to stretch lifestyle rather than secure position. Stretching lifestyle increases consumption. Securing position increases leverage advantage. A primary residence can be both, but it depends on entry price, financing terms, and margin. Six-figure earners often assume that higher income compensates for thin equity. It does not. Income stabilizes payment. Equity stabilizes position. Without equity cushion, volatility becomes threat. With equity cushion, volatility becomes temporary noise. The difference between those two states defines the trap. Another misunderstood element is time horizon. Mortgages are long commitments, 30 years. Income forecasts rarely extend that far with certainty. Career paths shift, industries evolve, health changes. High earners assume upward trajectory. Upward trajectory feels linear. Markets are cyclical. If a mortgage is structured assuming uninterrupted upward income, vulnerability increases. If it is structured with conservative assumptions, resilience increases. Resilience is rarely prioritized during emotional purchases. Housing decisions are rarely purely financial. They are tied to identity, family, stability, status. Emotion magnifies stretch. Stretch reduces margin. Reduced margin amplifies exposure. This does not mean mortgages are dangerous. It means leverage requires discipline beyond qualification. Leverage amplifies outcomes. It does not guarantee direction. If you control an appreciating asset with conservative structure, leverage accelerates wealth. If you control an overpriced asset with thin margin, leverage accelerates stress. The mortgage trap. Nobody explains is simple. Banks evaluate your ability to pay. They do not evaluate your long-term positioning strength. Approval is not alignment. 6 figures often move you into the approval category quickly. But approval can mask fragility. The employee mindset asks, "Can I handle the payment?" The ownership mindset asks, "Does this structure protect my downside?" Downside protection defines sustainable leverage. Without downside protection, leverage becomes speculation. Speculation tied to your primary residence creates psychological weight. Because your home is not just an asset, it is your stability anchor. When stability anchor is highly leveraged, stress increases. Stress reduces optionality. Optionality is financial freedom. Many high earners rush into home ownership once income qualifies. They believe waiting is riskier than stretching. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is not. The difference is structural analysis. Entry price relative to fundamentals. Rate environment. Personal liquidity. Emergency reserves. If emergency reserves disappear after closing, leverage becomes tight. Tight leverage reduces maneuverability. Maneuverability protects against cycles. Mortgage is a tool. Tools amplify intention. Without clarity of intention, tools create unintended consequences. If intention is status confirmation, leverage increases vulnerability. If intention is long-term positioning with conservative structure, leverage increases power. The trap is not the mortgage. The trap is confusing approval with strength. Strength requires margin. Margin requires discipline. Discipline requires resisting the emotional pull of arrival. 6 figures create the illusion of readiness. Readiness requires structural alignment. When alignment is absent, leverage magnifies stress. When alignment is present, leverage magnifies control. That is the distinction rarely explained. And until that distinction is internalized, high earners will continue to step into mortgages confidently, only to discover that income alone does not eliminate structural risk. That is the trap. And leverage, without margin, always exposes it. Chapter 6. Lifestyle. Inflation is the silent killer lifestyle. Inflation does not feel dangerous, it feels deserved. You earn more, you upgrade slightly, you reward yourself carefully, nothing reckless, nothing extreme, just incremental improvement. A better neighborhood, a newer car, higher-end groceries, more frequent travel, a cleaner gym, a more comfortable apartment. Each decision feels rational. Each adjustment feels earned. But lifestyle inflation is not dramatic. It is gradual. Gradual shifts are harder to detect than sudden mistakes. A sudden financial collapse is visible. A slow recalibration of standards is invisible. When income increases, baseline expectations increase with it. What once felt luxurious becomes normal. What once felt optional becomes necessary. Necessity is expensive. 6 figures often trigger this recalibration, not because of ego, because of environment. Your peer group shifts, your professional network changes, your exposure increases. You see how others live, you adjust accordingly. Not to impress, to belong. Belonging has a cost. That cost compounds quietly. Lifestyle inflation reduces surplus. Surplus funds opportunity. Opportunity funds ownership. Without surplus, ownership is delayed. Delay widens distance. The silent killer is not overspending. It is margin compression. When income grows but expenses grow proportionally, net leverage remains unchanged. Your life looks upgraded. Your structural position remains static. A six-figure earner might increase income by $25,000 over several years. Simultaneously, housing costs increase, insurance costs increase, transportation costs increase, discretionary expectations increase. The additional income absorbs new lifestyle demands. Little remains for asset positioning. From the outside, progress is visible. Inside the balance sheet, stagnation persists. Lifestyle inflation masks stagnation. You feel successful, but you are not accelerating. Acceleration requires excess. Excess requires discipline. Discipline requires resisting identity drift. Identity drift happens when your income becomes your identity anchor. You begin to live at the level you believe matches your earning tier. The car should match the salary. The apartment should match the job title. The school district should match the income bracket. These assumptions feel reasonable. They are culturally reinforced. But cultural reinforcement does not equal financial advantage. Every upgrade increases fixed costs. Fixed costs reduce flexibility. Flexibility creates leverage. Without flexibility, opportunities become stressful rather than strategic. Lifestyle inflation increases monthly burn rate. Burn rate increases dependence on income continuity. Dependence increases risk sensitivity. Risk sensitivity reduces bold positioning. You hesitate more, you delay longer, you wait for perfect certainty. Meanwhile, markets move. This is the silent effect. High earners rarely feel broke. They feel stretched. Stretched is different from unstable. Stretched means there is no slack. No slack means no room for aggressive asset accumulation. No room means no structural shift. The danger of lifestyle inflation is not that it destroys you. It keeps you stable. Stability without expansion is stagnation. And stagnation inside appreciating asset markets creates widening gaps. The higher your lifestyle baseline, the more income is required to maintain it. Maintenance consumes capital. Ownership builds capital. Maintenance feels productive. Ownership feels slow at first. Six-figure earners often choose visible upgrades over invisible positioning. A new car is visible. A larger investment contribution is invisible. A better apartment is visible. An additional down payment reserve is invisible. Visibility feeds ego. Invisibility feeds power. Power compounds quietly. Lifestyle inflation prioritizes visibility. Structural positioning prioritizes compounding. Compounding requires patience. Lifestyle inflation rewards immediacy. Immediate upgrades feel satisfying. Long-term positioning feels abstract. Abstraction is harder to prioritize. This is why lifestyle inflation is dangerous. It creates the illusion of forward movement. Forward movement without structural gain is lateral drift. Lateral drift consumes years. Years determine asset cycles. Asset cycles determine wealth separation. Six figures increase opportunity. They do not automatically increase discipline. Discipline must scale with income. If discipline remains fixed while income rises, lifestyle expands. If discipline scales faster than income, surplus grows. Surplus creates acceleration. Acceleration changes trajectory. Without acceleration, higher income simply funds higher living standards. Higher living standards increase psychological comfort. Comfort reduces urgency. Reduced urgency delays positioning. Delayed positioning reduces leverage advantage. The silent killer operates slowly. There is no dramatic event, just gradual compression. Gradual compression reduces strategic options. Reduced options create future stress. Future stress triggers reactive decisions. Reactive decisions rarely create asymmetry. Six-figure earners often believe they are one promotion away from financial breakthrough. In reality, they may be one disciplined cycle away. Income growth is visible progress. Expense control is invisible strength. Invisible strength determines asset positioning. Asset positioning determines long-term leverage. Lifestyle inflation erodes invisible strength. It does so politely. It does so socially. It does so rationally. And that is why it persists. You do not feel reckless. You feel aligned. Aligned with your income bracket. Aligned with your peers. Aligned with expectations. Alignment can be expensive. Structural advantage rarely feels aligned in the short term. It often feels restrained. Restraint today. Funds control tomorrow. Without restraint, 6 figures become consumption fuel. With restraint, 6 figures become capital formation. Capital formation changes the game. Consumption maintains the illusion. That is the silent killer. And unless discipline scales faster than lifestyle, income growth will continue to feel impressive, while ownership remains just out of reach. Chapter 7. Why high earners still feel broke. 6 figures look powerful on paper, but paper does not show friction. Friction hides in the gap between gross income and usable capital. The number you announce is not the number you control. A $120,000 salary is not $120,000 in your account. Federal taxes apply. State taxes apply. Payroll taxes apply. In many states, 25% to 35% disappears before you touch it. The 6-figure identity is built on gross income. The financial reality is built on net income. That difference alone reshapes power. If $120,000 becomes $85,000 after taxes, the leverage base shrinks. Now subtract fixed costs, rent or mortgage, insurance, utilities, transportation, healthcare premiums, retirement contributions. The visible salary shrinks again. What remains is not weak, but it is narrower than it sounds. High earners rarely feel poor. They feel compressed. Compressed means there is constant forward motion, but limited slack. Slack is power. Slack absorbs shock. Without slack, every unexpected expense creates tension. 6 figures reduce survival stress. They do not eliminate structural stress. Structural stress comes from obligation density. Obligation density increases as income rises. Higher earners often live in higher cost areas. Urban centers, strong school districts, competitive markets. Housing costs correlate with opportunity hubs. Opportunity hubs carry premium pricing. That premium pricing reduces disposable margin. Then comes lifestyle expectation layering. Professional wardrobe standards, networking events, travel tied to work, higher childcare costs, private schooling considerations. Each layer is justified. Each layer adds fixed cost. Fixed costs define financial rigidity. Rigidity reduces maneuverability. Maneuverability defines resilience. This is the paradox. High earners are more stable than low earners, but they are often less flexible than they realize. Flexibility is not about income. It is about cost structure. If monthly obligations consume most of your net income, flexibility declines. Declining flexibility increases anxiety sensitivity. You may not struggle to pay bills, but you may feel constantly responsible for sustaining performance. Performance becomes survival of lifestyle. That creates psychological weight. The weight is subtle. It appears as constant productivity pressure. You cannot pause easily. You cannot downshift easily because your lifestyle demands consistency. 6-figure earners are often one income stream dependent. Even with high salary, dependence remains. If job continuity falters, the structure strains quickly. The higher the fixed cost baseline, the less time buffer exists. Time buffer equals negotiating power. Without time buffer, decisions become reactive. Reactive decisions rarely create structural advantage. They preserve stability. Preserving stability feels like success. But it is maintenance. Maintenance does not create asymmetry. Another factor high earners underestimate is tax bracket drag over time. As income rises, marginal tax rates increase. Additional earnings do not translate proportionally into additional freedom. Each raise feels smaller than expected. That dampens acceleration. You work harder, you earn more. But after taxes, the incremental gain narrows. Meanwhile, asset prices adjust at full value. Assets do not pay marginal tax before appreciating. They reprice fully. This asymmetry intensifies the feeling of lag. You are climbing professionally, yet the horizon feels distant. That dissonance produces confusion. I earn this much. Why doesn't it feel like enough? Because enough is not defined by income. It is defined by margin. Margin equals net cash flow minus fixed obligations. Margin determines investment velocity. Investment velocity determines asset positioning. Without velocity, time works slower. High earners often save diligently, but savings allocated to retirement accounts are locked. Retirement assets grow slowly and are restricted by age. Primary wealth-building vehicles for high earners are often tied up in long-term vehicles. Liquidity remains limited. Limited liquidity reduces tactical positioning. This is why some six-figure earners feel stuck. They are doing everything responsibly. Yet forward movement feels incremental. Incremental movement inside accelerating markets feels like regression. Another hidden pressure is comparison. Six-figure earners compare upward. Peers with higher roles. Friends who bought homes earlier. Colleagues who received equity compensation. Upward comparison magnifies perceived inadequacy. Even if your income is objectively strong, perception shapes stress. Stress reduces clarity. Reduced clarity weakens strategy. The feeling of being almost there is dangerous. Almost there delays urgency. Urgency drives structural shifts. High earners rarely feel crisis. They feel proximity. Proximity without execution wastes cycles. Cycles determine asset access. Access determines long-term leverage. When someone earning $130,000 says they feel broke, they do not mean destitute. They mean constrained. Constrained by obligations, constrained by expectations, constrained by structure. Structure defines trajectory more than income. Income is a stream. Structure is the container. If the container is narrow, the stream cannot expand impact. The illusion says high income equals financial power. The reality says financial power equals control over capital after obligations. Obligations multiply quietly. Mortgage, property tax, insurance, maintenance, student loans, car financing. Each obligation reduces optionality. Optionality defines leverage potential. Without optionality, you are efficient, but not powerful. Efficiency maximizes income usage. Power maximizes asset control. High earners often optimize efficiency. They track budgets. They automate savings. They invest consistently. But optimization inside the wrong structure maintains dependency. Dependency feels secure until it doesn't. The moment income disruption occurs, the structure reveals itself, reveals its rigidity, reveals its tight margins, reveals its lack of buffer. Six figures reduce fear of immediate collapse. They do not eliminate structural fragility. Fragility is not about income size. It is about obligation, density, and asset positioning. If obligations grow faster than assets, fragility increases. If assets grow faster than obligations, resilience builds. Many high earners increase obligations alongside income. Few increase asset control at the same rate. That imbalance creates tension. Tension produces the quiet feeling of being broke, not financially empty, structurally stretched. Until structure shifts, income growth alone will not eliminate that tension. Because tension is not caused by low income, it is caused by narrow margin inside an expanding obligation environment. That is why high earners still feel broke. Not because they failed, because they optimized earnings without restructuring exposure. And earnings alone do not create freedom. Structure does. Chapter 8. The Shift. From salary to strategic ownership. Income is a tool. It was never meant to be the destination. 6 figures can fund comfort. They cannot guarantee control. Control requires ownership. Ownership changes the equation. Up to this point, the pattern is clear. Linear income inside an asymmetrical market creates friction. Inflation erodes purchasing power. Lifestyle inflation compresses margin. Obligations narrow flexibility. All of that happens while income grows. The mistake is not earning more. The mistake is believing earning more is enough. The shift begins when income stops being the goal and starts being the instrument. Salary is raw material. Ownership is structure. Raw material without structure produces consumption. Raw material applied strategically produces leverage. The question changes. Instead of asking, how can I increase my salary? The question becomes, how can my salary increase my asset control? That is a different game. Strategic ownership is not about rushing into any property. It is about positioning deliberately. Positioning means understanding cycles, understanding financing environments, understanding liquidity, understanding downside protection. Ownership without structure is speculation. Ownership with structure is power. Power compounds. The shift requires abandoning payment-based thinking. Monthly affordability is not the only metric. Control over appreciating exposure matters more. A fixed-rate mortgage secured in the right cycle can create asymmetry. A poorly timed purchase with thin margin creates pressure. Strategic ownership evaluates both sides. It asks, does this move increase my long-term leverage? Does this reduce my exposure to currency erosion? Does this create insulation from inflation? Does this improve my asset base relative to obligation growth? These questions move beyond comfort. They move toward control. Control shifts identity. You stop seeing yourself as a high earner. You begin seeing yourself as a capital allocator. Capital allocation changes behavior. Spending decisions become strategic. Location decisions become analytical. Debt decisions become structural. Income becomes ammunition, not validation. The 6-figure milestone becomes irrelevant because the focus shifts from earnings to exposure, exposure to appreciating assets, exposure to leverage, exposure to cycles. Cycles define wealth accumulation more than salary increments. Strategic ownership accepts volatility. It does not chase comfort. Comfort keeps you inside maintenance mode. Volatility, when controlled, creates opportunity. This does not mean reckless risk. It means calculated positioning. Calculated positioning requires margin. Margin requires discipline. Discipline requires resisting social confirmation. Ownership often looks conservative before it looks powerful. It may require living below income level temporarily. It may require delaying visible upgrades. It may require allocating surplus aggressively toward down payments rather than consumption. Those decisions feel restrictive in the short term. They feel liberating in the long term. Strategic ownership compresses gratification to expand leverage. Income-based living expands gratification to compress leverage. That is the trade-off. When salary becomes the primary metric of success, growth is capped by labor. When asset control becomes the primary metric, growth is amplified by time. Time multiplies assets. Time resets income. You must earn income again every month. Assets appreciate continuously, if positioned correctly. The shift also changes how risk is defined. In the salary mindset, risk is losing income. In the ownership mindset, risk is missing exposure. These are opposite fears. Fear of income loss creates conservative consumption. Fear of missed exposure creates proactive positioning. Proactive positioning requires conviction. Conviction requires clarity of structure. Structure is built through liquidity reserves, debt ratios that allow breathing room, down payments that protect equity, asset selection based on fundamentals rather than emotion. Strategic ownership is not glamorous. It is methodical. It focuses on downside protection first. Downside protection preserves position. Preserved position allows compounding. Compounding creates separation. Separation reduces dependence on salary. That is the ultimate shift. Income becomes optional over time. Optional income creates negotiating power. Negotiating power creates freedom. Freedom is not defined by paycheck size. It is defined by structural independence. Structural independence requires assets that work independently of labor. Primary residence can be part of that equation, but only if entered strategically. The goal is not just to own a home. The goal is to control appreciating leverage in a disciplined way. Strategic ownership views housing as a balance sheet decision, not an emotional milestone. Emotion influences timing poorly. Structure guides timing rationally. When this shift happens, the narrative changes. You stop asking, why can't my six-figure salary buy me a house? You start asking, how can I structure my capital so that housing becomes leverage rather than pressure? That question unlocks clarity. Clarity reduces comparison. Comparison fades when structure strengthens. The six-figure illusion dissolves when ownership becomes the metric. Income remains important, but it is no longer the identity anchor. It is the fuel. Fuel must be directed. Without direction, it burns quickly. With direction, it powers movement. Movement inside a set market changes trajectory. Trajectory determines outcome. The shift from salary to strategic ownership is not dramatic. It is deliberate. It is quiet. It often goes unnoticed by peers, but over cycles, it compounds, and compounding always separates those who allocate from those who consume. Six figures can start the process. They cannot finish it alone. Only positioning finishes it. That is the shift. Strategic ownership also requires redefining patience. Patience is not waiting passively. Patience is holding position while others hesitate. In salary thinking, patience means waiting for the next raise. In ownership thinking, patience means securing exposure and allowing time to compound. Those are not the same form of patience. One waits for permission. The other waits with leverage already in place. This is why timing matters differently inside the ownership game. You do not need perfect market conditions. You need structural alignment, liquidity in reserve, downside protection in place, debt structured intelligently, expectations calibrated conservatively. Once aligned, time becomes an ally. Without alignment, time becomes a competitor. Time inside an appreciating market increases entry cost. Time inside a leveraged position increases equity. The direction depends on positioning. Strategic ownership is not about predicting markets perfectly. It is about refusing to remain permanently outside them. Outside, you react. Inside, you participate. Participation builds equity. Reaction builds frustration. The shift is subtle but decisive. Income asks, how much did I earn this year? Ownership asks, how much of the market do I control? Control compounds. Earnings reset. When this distinction becomes clear, behavior changes naturally. You stop celebrating income milestones as final victories. You start viewing them as capital accumulation checkpoints. The goal is no longer to impress with earnings. The goal is to compress dependency. Dependency shrinks when assets expand. Assets expand when positioning precedes comfort. And once comfort is no longer the metric, strategy becomes sharper. That is when salary stops defining you, and ownership begins structuring you. Six figures were never the finish line. They were a test of whether you would confuse income with power. You were told that once you earned enough, the rest would follow. That stability would convert into ownership. That discipline would automatically unlock leverage. But the housing market does not reward discipline alone. It rewards positioning, and positioning requires a shift. Throughout this journey, one pattern repeated itself. Income grows through effort. Assets grow through structure. Effort is personal. Structure is systemic. You can work harder. You cannot outwork monetary expansion. You cannot outwork capital velocity. You cannot outwork leverage. You can only position yourself inside it. 6 figures create comfort. Comfort reduces urgency. Reduced urgency delays entry. Delayed entry widens distance. Distance creates frustration. That frustration is not a failure of income, it is a failure of alignment. Alignment between earnings and exposure. Alignment between margin and leverage. Alignment between timing and structure. High earners often believe they are one promotion away from freedom. In reality, they are one structural shift away. A shift from celebrating salary to allocating capital. A shift from optimizing lifestyle to expanding margin. A shift from measuring progress by paycheck to measuring progress by control. Control changes everything. Control over appreciating assets. Control over fixed financing. Control over downside risk. Without control, income remains dependent. Dependent on employers. Dependent on health. Dependent on uninterrupted performance. Dependency feels stable until it isn't. Ownership reduces dependency. Not instantly, not magically, but structurally. Each year positioned inside appreciating assets shifts leverage slightly in your favor. Each year outside widens the gap slightly against you. Those slight shifts compound. Compounding does not need drama. It needs time. Time rewards those inside the structure. It pressures those outside it. That is the rule. The world did not lie to you about working hard. Hard work builds income, but income alone does not build insulation. Insulation comes from assets. Assets do not care about your job title. They care about entry. The earlier entry occurs, the greater the asymmetry. The longer delay persists, the narrower the margin. 6 figures can be a powerful starting point. They can fund positioning. They can create margin, but only if they are treated as fuel. Fuel must be directed. If directed toward consumption, it maintains comfort. If directed toward control, it builds leverage. Comfort fades quickly. Leverage compounds quietly. One impresses socially, the other transforms structurally. When you understand this, the narrative changes. You stop asking whether your salary is high enough. You start asking whether your structure is strong enough. Strength is not defined by gross income. It is defined by resilience, margin, and exposure. Resilience absorbs shocks. Margin funds opportunity. Exposure enables compounding. Those 3 elements create independence. Independence is the real milestone. Not 6 figures, not a title, not visible upgrades. Independence means income becomes optional over time. Optional income is power. Power reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety increases clarity. Clarity sharpens allocation. Allocation builds assets. Assets reduce dependency. Dependency shrinks. The cycle reverses. That is the shift. People who chase income will always feel slightly behind. People who build position move differently. They are not louder. They are not flashier. They are structured. And structure outlasts salary. Understand this early, and 6 figures become a launchpad. Ignore it, and 6 figures become a ceiling. The number was never the problem. The misunderstanding was. And once that misunderstanding dissolves, the housing market stops feeling unfair. It starts feeling mechanical. Mechanics can be studied, mechanics can be positioned, mechanics can be leveraged. That is how ownership replaces illusion. That is how salary becomes strategy. And that is how structural power is built. Not through income alone, but through control. That is the rule.